priceless sapphire necklace, shrouded in century-old mystery, vanished without a trace.
No forced entry. Surgical precision. Why this necklace? A chill runs down his spine.
This is your chance, Leo. Prove what you are worth.
An obvious suspect. A vague clue. The paths split here. Consequences await both. Where the eye cannot reach, the shadow reveals the gleam. Choose wisely, Leo. Not all that glitters is gold.
The early morning silence was broken by the insistent sound of a phone ringing. Leo, a young detective known more for his determination than his experience, answered, still half asleep. On the other end, a tense voice brought the news. The Glaister Warehouse, famous for storing pieces of priceless historical value, had been broken into. A rare jewel, a sapphire necklace with a history shrouded in mystery, had disappeared. As he listened to the details, Leo felt a chill. This was no ordinary robbery. The lack of clear signs of forced entry and the surgical precision of the crime indicated something more complex. Why that necklace? He thought. What is it about it that attracts so much danger? Upon arriving at the warehouse, he was greeted by his mentor Samuel, a man who seemed to carry the weight of years of secrets. Samuel watched him with watchful eyes, as if already knowing this case would test Leo in ways he didn't yet understand. "This is your chance to prove yourself," Samuel said, handing him 2 envelopes. "Here are your options. One contains an obvious suspect, a straightforward path. The other contains a vague clue that may lead nowhere but could conceal the truth." Leo hesitated, sensing that either choice carried consequences beyond the crime. Opening the envelopes, he found a dilemma. The first contained a name, Victor, the night shift security guard with a criminal record. The second was simply an enigmatic phrase written on aged paper. Where the eye cannot reach, the shadow reveals the gleam. Samuel offered no further explanation, just an enigmatic smile. "Choose wisely, Leo. Not all that glitters is gold." As the young detective considered the options, a thought plagued him. What if the wrong choice not only compromised the case, but revealed something he'd rather never know? Samuel watched Leo from afar, his expression calm, as if he had already anticipated the dilemmas the young man would face. For him, every choice a detective made shaped not only the course of an investigation, but also the investigator's character. "Decisions aren't just about evidence," Samuel said, gesturing for Leo to come closer. "They're about understanding the shadows people hide and the truths they fear to reveal." Leo felt the weight of the words, as if Samuel were handing him more than a case, a life lesson embedded in the mystery. "Look," Samuel continued with that calculated tone that always made him seem one step ahead. "I'm not going to help you directly. This is yours, but I'm going to give you a test." He opened the 2 envelopes in front of Leo and explained the options. One of them seems obvious. It will follow a straight and clear path, but with little chance of teaching you anything new. The other, a vague, disconnected clue, a choice that requires courage, but may lead you to the unexpected. Samuel knew he couldn't influence the decision, but his words echoed in Leo like an unsolved riddle. Leo felt torn, but one thought nagged at him. Why does Samuel want me to choose on my own? Is there more to this case than he's revealing? He needed to decide, but the doubt was overwhelming. What did Samuel expect him to see in the case or in himself? Leo felt that the choice, more than a test, was an invitation to face something greater than the crime itself, but he still didn't know. At what cost? Leo held the 2 envelopes as if they carried the weight of the world. He looked at the first one, bearing the name of Victor, the warehouse security guard. It all seemed so straightforward. A man with a criminal record, no clear alibi, and in the right place to commit the crime. Why complicate matters? Sometimes the most obvious answer is the right one, he muttered to himself, trying to justify his choice. However, the other envelope with that enigmatic phrase called to him in an almost irrational way. Where the eye can't reach, the shadow reveals its brightness. Something in that mystery seemed to whisper a hidden truth. After a long sigh, he decided to pursue the most obvious lead, Victor. As he investigated him, Leo found evidence that seemed to fit perfectly. Inconsistent attendance records, suspicious movements during his shift, and even a small piece of jewelry found in his locker, as if it had been forgotten after the robbery. But something didn't add up. It all seemed too easy. With each new discovery, Leo felt like the pieces were being deliberately placed, as if someone wanted him to follow that path. As he reviewed the evidence, a doubt grew in his mind. What if this is all a distraction? A trap to make me look in the wrong place? Leo realized he couldn't ignore the phrase in the other envelope. He knew he needed to confront the shadows Samuel had mentioned, but the question remained, what really lurks where the eye can't see? Frustrated with the linearity of the clues against Victor, Leo decided to revisit the second envelope. The enigmatic phrase still echoed in his mind, challenging him to look beyond the obvious. Where the eyes cannot reach, the shadow reveals the light. He returned to the warehouse at night, when the silence seemed to amplify every noise. With a flashlight in hand and the phrase as his guide, he began exploring areas that had gone unnoticed during his first investigation. He felt as if he were being led by something greater than his own intuition. In a locked back room, Leo found something he hadn't expected, a drawer full of old documents. Among them was a sheet of paper with rudimentary drawings of a necklace very similar to the stolen piece. There were also fragmentary notes mentioning an anonymous buyer interested in the jewel, mentioning an obscure location, Warehouse 17, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Why hasn't this surfaced before? Leo wondered, feeling like he was finally beginning to unearth something real. As he pored over the papers, the idea that Victor was merely a diversion became clear. Someone was leading the investigation to frame him while hiding the real operation in the shadows. But who was this manipulator? Leo now knew he had to follow the Warehouse 17 lead, even though it could be a trap. And the question that followed him was inevitable. What will I find by following this shadow? Guided by the notes he found, Leo arrived at Warehouse 17 in the dead of night. The place looked abandoned for decades, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls hiding secrets from the past. The air was thick, and each footstep echoed like a warning that he was not alone. Even with fear throbbing in his chest, Leo pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. His flashlight illuminated paths that seemed to lead nowhere, until deep inside the warehouse he found a locked metal door. Using improvised tools, Leo managed to pry open the door, revealing an antique safe and a small makeshift office. Inside he found forged receipts, transaction records, and most importantly, a contract mentioning the stolen necklace. The documents were signed by someone he never expected to see involved, Arthur Delacroix, a renowned art collector and frequent customer of the warehouse. The connection was clear. Arthur was using Victor as a scapegoat while negotiating the necklace with illegal buyers. Suddenly, a noise behind him made him freeze. A figure emerged from the shadows, Arthur himself, with a cold, calculating gaze. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" he said, holding a gun. Leo realized he was at the epicenter of the mystery, but the burning question now was, how to get out of this alive and bring the truth to the world. Arthur walked slowly toward Leo, his gun pointed threateningly. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice firm but unhurried. Leo, trying to remain calm, raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. He knew he needed time. "I just want to understand, Arthur. Why risk so much for a necklace, even if you have everything?" Arthur smiled, but it was an empty smile. Because some pieces are priceless on the black market. They have value to those who understand their power. Leo realized that Arthur wasn't just an ambitious collector, but someone obsessed with the control that the jewel could give him. As Arthur explained his plan to sell the necklace to an international buyer, Leo noticed something, the half-open door he'd used to enter. If he could distract Arthur long enough, he might have a chance to escape. "You're clever, Arthur, but all criminals make mistakes. Yours was underestimating who would look beyond the planted evidence," Leo said provocatively. The provocation worked. Arthur, irritated, moved even closer, allowing Leo to knock over a nearby shelf with a swift kick. The deafening noise gave Leo the seconds he needed to escape through the door, carrying the documents incriminating Arthur with him. Outside, he took a deep breath. knowing he had barely survived. But the question that haunted him now was, will this evidence be enough to dismantle Arthur's network? Running through the dark streets, documents clutched to his chest, Leo couldn't shake the thoughts that plagued him. Arthur wasn't just a common criminal. He was a powerful man with connections that could hinder any attempt at justice. Why did I go so far? He thought, as his legs began to weaken with exhaustion. But deep down, he knew the answer. It wasn't just about solving the case. It was about proving to himself that he could go beyond the obvious, that he could face something bigger than his own doubts. Upon reaching a safe location, Leo finally stopped to analyze the documents he had recovered. Each paper was a piece of a complex puzzle, but together they formed a clear picture. Arthur had not only stolen the necklace, but had used his influence to derail previous investigations. Leo knew he held the key to dismantling the scheme, but the risk was still enormous. If Arthur had managed to manipulate so many people, what was stopping him from finding me first? This doubt consumed him, but it also drove him. Leo felt a crushing weight in his decisions, but also a strange sense of clarity. He realized that the choices he'd made, even the ones that seemed wrong, had led him to the right place. Now, the question that haunted him was another: how to turn these trials into a definitive victory. He knew he would need allies, but above all, he needed to maintain his courage. The game wasn't over yet, and he was about to enter the most dangerous part. After organizing all the documents, Leo knew he needed a strategy to expose Arthur without putting his life at risk. He returned to his mentor, Samuel, and revealed everything he had discovered. Samuel, who seemed to have expected something of this magnitude, listened silently as Leo detailed each piece of the puzzle. "You did well to look beyond the obvious," Samuel said with a slight smile. "But now it's time to play smart. This kind of enemy doesn't go down easily." Samuel suggested that Leo hand over the evidence to the authorities anonymously, but Leo disagreed. "If I don't see this through, he might escape again," he stated firmly. Together, they devised a meticulous plan, engaging the media to ensure the evidence was made public before Arthur had a chance to cover his tracks. They also decided to monitor the collector closely, recording any movement that might reinforce the accusations. "Exposure is the only weapon we have against someone operating in the shadows," Samuel explained. The plan hinged on timing and precision. Leo knew every step would be a race against the clock. He also knew Arthur wouldn't stand still while the siege closed in. "What if he discovers what we're doing before we act?" Leo asked, his tone worried. Samuel simply replied, "The biggest mistake a man like him makes is believing no one will have the courage to confront him. But you've already proven otherwise, haven't you?" Even so, Leo couldn't shake the doubt. "Am I prepared to face the consequences of this direct confrontation?" Arthur began to sense something was wrong. He had always been meticulous, but the small signs that someone was tampering with his operations made him uneasy. Bank accounts were being monitored. His black market contacts stopped responding, and rumors of investigations began to circulate. "Someone is pulling the strings I left loose," he thought, clenching his fists in frustration. He knew it was only a matter of time before the truth began to emerge, but he still didn't know who was behind it. Meanwhile, Leo and Samuel were one step ahead. They had secured a renowned investigative journalist to take the case, ensuring the story was exposed with maximum impact. "It's not just about proving he stole the necklace," Leo explained to the journalist. "It's about exposing the entire scheme and ensuring he never does this to anyone again." The journalist, recognizing the gravity of the accusations, began preparing an explosive report, while Leo continued gathering more evidence. The noose was closing in quickly, but Leo knew Arthur wasn't the type to accept defeat passively. The collector was certainly planning something to regain control, and as everything moved toward public exposure, Leo couldn't help but wonder, what will Arthur do when he discovers I'm behind all this? Arthur wasn't just a powerful man. He was a strategist who knew how to turn the tables to his advantage. When he began to sense someone was building a case against him, he acted quickly. He hired a team of experts to track any suspicious movements, and before long, Leo was in their crosshairs. One of his black market contacts warned of the involvement of a young detective who seemed to know too much. "So he thinks he can take me down?" Arthur murmured, with a cold smile. "Let's show him he's playing way out of his league." As Leo reviewed the latest evidence, an anonymous email arrived on his computer. It was a blunt message. "You think you can win? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The threatening tone made his heart race, but he didn't let fear overwhelm him. Instead, Leo shared the content with Samuel, who saw it as confirmation that they were on the right track. "It means he's feeling the pressure," Samuel said, "but it also means he may act more dangerously now." However, the biggest blow was yet to come. The next day, forged documents began circulating, accusing Leo of tampering with evidence and engaging in illegal activities. It was a clear attempt to discredit the young detective before he could expose Arthur, but Leo was undeterred. He knew he needed a decisive move to turn the tables. The question that now plagued him was, how can I prove my integrity before Arthur destroys my credibility? Leo knew Arthur had declared war. False accusations against him were spreading rapidly, threatening not only his reputation but also the hard work he had put into gathering evidence. "If I back down now, he wins," he thought as he reviewed the incriminating documents in his hands. But backing down was not an option. With Samuel's help, he decided to take a bold step, release some of the evidence directly to the public before Arthur could bury the truth. With the help of the investigative journalist, Leo prepared an exclusive interview where he revealed the details of the case, explaining how Arthur had manipulated not only the system but also the people around him to protect himself. The evidence was meticulously presented, including recordings and bank records that connected Arthur to international criminal networks. "The truth can be distorted for a while," Leo said during the interview, "but it always finds a way to emerge." Leo's words were direct but charged with conviction, resonating with the audience. As the report gained momentum and Arthur felt the pressure mounting, Leo knew this was just the beginning. The gambit had worked, but the price would be high. "He won't stand still," Samuel warned gravely, and Leo knew his mentor was right. Now the tide had completely changed, and the question echoing in his mind was, how far would Arthur go to protect his secrets and retaliate? Arthur, realizing that Leo had exposed his operations, went into crisis mode. His lawyers began bombarding the media with statements denying the accusations, calling them theories fabricated by a desperate detective seeking attention. However, the avalanche of evidence presented by Leo made Arthur's defense increasingly fragile. He needed a new strategy, and fast. "If I can't put out the fire, I'll divert the attention," Arthur told one of his accomplices. So he began planting false clues that pointed to Samuel's alleged involvement in the scheme. Meanwhile, Leo felt the pressure mounting. Although he had gained public support, he knew Arthur's influence was still dangerous. In an urgent meeting with Samuel, his mentor revealed something that took Leo by surprise. "Arthur and I have crossed paths before," he confessed, his eyes dark. "He tried to bring me down years ago, but he couldn't. It seems he's now trying to finish what he started." Leo realized he was dealing with a much bigger battle than he had imagined, one involving his mentor's past and the secrets he had kept. With the new accusations against Samuel gaining momentum, Leo knew he needed to act quickly to debunk them before the media's focus shifted. But while trying to protect his mentor, he couldn't ignore the fact that Arthur was 2 steps ahead. The question loomed large. Could they win this game before Arthur's next move destroyed them completely? Leo was determined to clear Samuel's name, but Arthur's fabricated accusations were gaining traction. A news report insinuated that Samuel had engaged in illegal activity during a past investigation, just when he first crossed paths with Arthur. Although Leo knew the accusations were fabricated, public doubt was beginning to spread. Why didn't he ever talk about this before? Leo wondered as he leafed through old files, searching for anything that might debunk Arthur's narrative. One night, Samuel called Leo for a private conversation. "There's something you need to know," he began, his tone heavy. Samuel revealed that years ago, while investigating another of Arthur's schemes, he had been forced to cover up some clues to protect a key witness. Arthur had used this as a weapon to discredit Samuel at the time, and now he was rehashing the same story. "I made mistakes, Leo, but they were mistakes to protect lives, not to destroy them," Samuel said, with a sincerity Leo had never seen before. For Leo, Samuel's past wasn't an obstacle, but a vital piece of the puzzle. He knew that if he could expose how Arthur had manipulated the facts, he could turn the narrative in their favor. But the weight of this revelation raised a new question. To what extent can the secrets of the past shape the present and define the future? With Samuel's past cleared up, Leo realized he needed to change his approach. He knew Arthur was manipulating narratives and fabricating lies, but he also knew that the truth alone wasn't enough to convince the public and the authorities. "If we want to win, we need to show the human side of this story," Leo said as he reviewed the files with Samuel. The decision was clear, not only to dismantle Arthur's lies, but also to highlight the real impact of his actions. Leo decided to gather witnesses who had been victims of Arthur's manipulations over the years. Each brought a unique piece to the puzzle: a bankrupt merchant, a betrayed collector, and even a former accomplice who regretted his actions. These voices added an emotional layer to the investigation, something no amount of technical evidence could achieve. As the stories emerged, Leo realized the pattern. Arthur not only stole, but also destroyed lives in the process. It was this truth they needed to amplify. As Leo prepared for a new media interview, he knew he was putting everything on the line. He chose to begin with a provocative question: how many more lives must be ruined before justice reaches those who hide behind power? It was a direct call to the public and authorities, an invitation to look beyond the lies and see the true impact of what was at stake. But as the pieces aligned, Leo knew Arthur was watching, and that his next move could be his most dangerous yet. Arthur watched Leo's latest interview with a mixture of anger and contempt. The victim stories began to gain traction on social media and in the media, painting a clear portrait of who he really was. For the first time, the control Arthur had always exerted over his narrative began to slip through his fingers. He knew he needed to act quickly to contain the damage, but the problem was bigger than simply denying the accusations. The witnesses Leo had gathered were eroding the foundation of his influence. Arthur summoned his closest allies to an emergency meeting at his mansion. Among them were lawyers, image consultants, and even some of the accomplices who still owed him favors. "Leo wants to turn this into an emotional spectacle," he said coldly. "Let's give the public something more interesting to watch." Arthur planned to turn the tables with a counter-accusation. He would make it appear that Samuel, with Leo's help, was using the victims to fabricate a false story. "People believe what they see," he continued, "and that's what we need to focus on." As Arthur plotted his next move, Leo felt the impact of his public exposure. More witnesses began to come forward, but the fear of retaliation still lingered. He knew Arthur wouldn't stand still, and the fight was far from over. The question remained: how far would Arthur go to protect his empire of lies? Arthur pulled out all the stops with his final gambit. He hired a team specializing in digital manipulation to fabricate false evidence against Leo and Samuel. Edited images, distorted recordings, and forged documents began circulating online, suggesting that Leo had manipulated witnesses to incriminate Arthur. The narrative was convincing and was quickly picked up by the tabloid media. The truth is only a well-told version, thought Arthur, as he watched social media explode with questions about Leo. For Leo, the blow was devastating. He saw his credibility questioned by people who had previously supported him. Even with real evidence on his side, the damage was done. Samuel tried to reassure him. That's what men like Arthur do. They hide behind confusion to prevent people from seeing the truth. But remember, Leo, shadows can't extinguish the light. Samuel's words rekindled something in Leo. He realized he needed something more solid than emotional arguments. He needed proof that no one could refute. Leo decided to focus on the one thing Arthur couldn't control: the bank records connecting his personal accounts to the money from the stolen necklace. With the help of a contact in the financial sector, he was able to track transfers Arthur thought he had covered up. It was the missing link. But the question that lingered was, can I expose this evidence before Arthur destroys everything I've built? With the bank records in hand, Leo finally had what he needed to definitively unmask Arthur. The documents showed transfers made to offshore accounts linked directly to the collector and the anonymous buyer of the stolen necklace. It was more than evidence. It was a surefire hit. Analyzing the records with Samuel, they identified dates that coincided exactly with the events of the theft. He thought he could cover his tracks, Samuel said. But greed always leaves a trail. Leo knew he needed to act quickly. He contacted the investigative journalist and presented the evidence in detail, ensuring it would be published widely and irreversibly. At the same time, he sent the records to the authorities, ensuring that Arthur couldn't manipulate the system to delay the case. This goes straight to the heart of his scheme, Leo explained. No matter how much influence he has, there's no escaping this. Samuel, watching from afar, smiled proudly. You turned his shadows into his greatest light. When the evidence was released, the impact was immediate. The media, previously hesitant, now had a solid story to tell, and the public quickly changed its mind. Arthur tried to fight back, but it was too late. The net was closed, and everything he had built was beginning to crumble. However, the question looming over Leo was inevitable. With the truth exposed, what kind of retaliation will Arthur attempt before he is finally defeated? Arthur realized his reign of manipulation was coming to an end. Leo's irrefutable evidence was enough for authorities to issue an arrest warrant. While headlines blared his connection to financial crimes and the necklace theft, Arthur still tried in every way to salvage what remained of his influence. He called a final meeting with his closest allies, but the room, once filled with sycophants, was nearly empty. It seems even the shadows can abandon you, he muttered, with a bitter touch of irony. The police operation to capture him was swift and efficient. Arthur was arrested in his mansion, surrounded by the luxury he so cherished, but which was now nothing more than a reminder of his decadence. As he was escorted out, he met Leo's eyes. "Do you think you've won?" Arthur asked with a cold smile. "The truth always has a price." Leo, however, remained firm. "And lies, Arthur, always exact a higher price," he replied, his tone calm but confident. The exchange of glances was the closing of a cycle, the moment Leo knew he had won. With Arthur in custody, the victims began to receive justice. The necklace, recovered by authorities, returned to the warehouse as a symbol that not everything can be bought or manipulated. For Leo, the victory was not just over Arthur, but over his own doubts and limitations. However, he knew that every victory comes with a question. What had this battle prepared him to face in the future? With the case solved and Arthur finally arrested, Leo received the recognition he had long craved. The media, which had initially doubted his integrity, now celebrated him as the detective who had the courage to take on a criminal giant. At a press conference organized by the authorities, Leo was invited to speak about his experience. Nervous but grateful, he took the stage and began his speech with a phrase that resonated with everything he had learned. The truth always finds a way to emerge, even in the darkest shadows. Leo used the moment to highlight not only his journey, but also the crucial role of witnesses and his mentor, Samuel. "I couldn't have done this alone," he said, looking at Samuel in the audience. His mentor, visibly moved, smiled slightly, knowing his trust in Leo had paid off. The audience gave a standing ovation. But for Leo, the real reward wasn't the spotlight, but the sense of accomplishment. He hadn't just solved a case. He'd proven that courage and integrity can overcome even the most powerful adversaries. After the event, as he walked out of the auditorium, Leo was approached by one of Arthur's victims. "Thank you for not giving up," the man said, shaking Leo's hand sincerely. The young detective smiled, but deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The question that haunted him now was different. How can he use this experience to continue bringing justice to the world? After the case was closed, Leo returned to his small office, now with a new sparkle in his eyes. He looked at the desk where so many documents had passed and so many sleepless nights had been spent. The world seemed different now, not because everything had changed, but because he had changed. "Every shadow I faced brought me more clarity about who I am," he thought, as he sorted through the remaining case papers. The journey hadn't just unmasked Arthur, it had transformed him. Samuel entered the office, as always, without warning. "Well, you did it," he said, sitting in the corner chair he always occupied. "But I hope you know this is just the beginning." Leo laughed, but he knew Samuel was right. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth will always be up for grabs," he replied. "But that doesn't scare me anymore. I'm ready for whatever comes." The mentor smiled with quiet pride and left without another word, leaving Leo to his thoughts. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, Leo reflected on everything he had faced. Every decision, every moment of doubt, and every step outside his comfort zone had led to this moment. He knew the battles would continue, but he also knew that each one would shape him even further. And with that, he asked himself one final question. If I've won this battle, what other horizons await me?